All right. So, like I said, last week we talked a little bit about vision, and today I've already kind of spoiled there's no surprise. We're talking a little bit about strategy. We're talking about culture. Last week, if you were here, if you've watched it, if you've caught back up, you'll maybe remember I started the sermon with a story about a questionable decision that I made to run and to pack all of the things I would need for camping into a backpack, and then run with the backpack and water and all of those things out, a distance and back. Talked about how when you're trying to do anything, right, when you're trying to accomplish something, whether it's as an organization, whether it's in your personal life, whether it's, the life of a family or household, whatever it is, like you need to know what that thing is. You need to be really clear about what the goal is, about what the win is, about what the vision is. You need to clarify that. And then you need to know how you're going to get there. You maybe remember, maybe not, that I said you need to know what to take. You need to know what tools you'll need for the road. You need to know what's going to work. You need to know what's not going to work. What is going to hinder you? What's going to be too heavy? And and I talked a little bit about how we didn't do that part so well. We knew where we were going. We knew how to get there. It was a long, straight, flat road. Like you couldn't make a wrong turn if you tried. But we took far too much stuff, and Connie had to come bail us out halfway through our adventure, pick up half our gear, most of our gear, really, actually, and take it home so that we could survive day 2 of this trip that we had planned. Today, we're talking about gear. Today we're talking about what it is that we need, like what are some of the tools, and like I said, what is our strategy going to be? And maybe more importantly than strategy, I want to talk a little bit about culture. What's going to inform our strategy? What's going to be the heart behind why we're doing what we're doing? And so the what is important, and it may develop and grow, and I pray it does over the years, right? The heart behind those things needs to be set and needs to be clear. And so like I said, right off the bat, I want to start today's sermon with one question. And I'm not actually going to ask for answers, but I want to. I want to ask for answers. I want to, because I think that sometimes when preachers, as you may be sitting there, hey, great, Grant, you're just, you're asking a rhetorical question again, and rhetorical questions, they don't really do much because there's no skin in the game. As soon as I say to you, hey, give me an answer, there's a little bit more skin in the game, right? Because you actually got to think stuff through in a little extra measure. And so the question is simply this: what would you be willing to give up if it meant your kids and your grandkids knew Jesus? That's it. That's the question. And put it in a little bit different of a lens and a light, because I realize not all of us have kids and grandkids, and that may be a painful story, a journey for you, and I don't want you to feel excluded here, because it's not the heart. The heart of this question is this: what would it be? What would you be willing to give up if it meant your nieces and nephews, your friends' kids, the next generation? When you see like my kids running around and some of the other kids here, who come to worship, like what is it? What would you be willing to give up if it meant that those kids knew Jesus and had a vibrant faith, a trust in a God, a faith that maybe looks different than yours? Right, a faith of different experience and different generation, but nonetheless, like this vibrant faith in a God who loves them. At the end of the day, if we are to accomplish our vision, we set our sights on last week, if we are going to see people become fully alive followers of Jesus, each one of us needs to be able to answer that question. What are we willing to give? How are we willing to serve? What are we willing to do? What am I willing to give up, to surrender, if it means at the end of the day, my kids, yours, grandkids, friends beyond knew Jesus? The last church that I served in built a new building. And it wasn't while I was there, it wasn't while Connie and I were there, like this was long before we ever showed up. But the church had kind of outgrown their current building. They built this new big building, and then they shifted, right? The church moved from their old building to their new building. And I say that intentionally, like the church moved from one building to another. And it was a modern building, it was new, like it didn't have pews, it had chairs. And the chairs linked together so that they looked like pews, but they weren't pews. Like, it was a change, and there was a big platform up front, and some of the things that they were used to seeing, that people were used to seeing, didn't make the shift with them over to this new building. And there's this story, again, before I got here, but we met this guy who I'm going to tell this story about. But shortly after the church moved into that building, he's, mingling kind of in the foyer, their gathering hall, right? And he walks up to the minister, and he's like, I hate this. I hate everything about it. I miss my old church. I miss that old building. I miss the things that I was comfortable in. I miss the way we did, the way we did worship and the way it felt. And I miss going to that building, but don't you dare change it. Because my grandkids love being here. My grandkids are here. He's like, I hate it. All of it. But don't even for a second think about changing any of it. When I think about my own kids, I think simply about this one question. Maybe this breaks it down in a little different of a measure. What do I want them to know about Jesus? And in a scarier version, how is the way I am living my life teaching them about Jesus? The way I love them, the way I love Connie, my spouse, my partner, the way I treat you, the church, the way I interact with others, when we drive up to a coffee shop, when we go in and, at every moment in my life, how is the way I am choosing to live my life teaching them about Jesus? Because it all is, the good, the bad, the ugly, all of it teaches them about the dude that I stand up here on a Sunday and talk about day by day by day. As the church, I think we need to approach everything we do from one of two perspectives. And I think that these perspectives can very quickly become mutually exclusive. And the questions are, at the end of the day, what do I want out of church? Or what am I willing to give up for our church, for the church? One, I say they become mutually exclusive because one inherently prioritizes yourself and the other prioritizes the other. And so if our vision, like I said, if our vision is to see people become fully alive followers of Jesus, like if that is what we are going to exist to do and to see and to celebrate and to embrace, like in our lifetime as a congregation, as a church, if we are going to exist in ways that help you, us, me, all of us become more fully alive followers of Jesus, we need to prioritize the other. Our strategy needs to be to prioritize who we want to see. And to prioritize who we want to see in our church as a part of our community. I need to think about the person who I want to become. We need to think about the people we are becoming, and we need to think about the people we are reaching or not reaching. Who is it that we are going to see? And how are we going to prioritize who we want to see in our church? It's like the chicken-egg debacle all over again. I had to take it back there, but it is. If we want to see somebody, if we want to see families, for example, if we want to see families with kids, a part of our church, right, a part of our community, we need to live today in a way that prioritizes families with kids. No matter how many families with kids there actually are today, we need to live today in a way that we want to see happen and come to fruition tomorrow, because if we don't, that tomorrow is not going to come. You may sit there and say, hey, there's not many kids today. There are not many youth. There aren't really many people like showing up. What does that mean, right? It's in another way. A story that Connie actually told me as we were working this message out and as I was bouncing ideas off of her and trying to clarify this message, told this story of a church who was wrestling through whether or not to put a wheelchair lift, like an elevator, in their building. So multiple levels like us, and they were thinking about how, should we make our building accessible for people with mobility issues? And one of the people in the conversation said, well, we don't have anybody in a wheelchair, so we don't really need a lift. To which somebody else replied, no, we don't have anybody in wheelchairs and people with mobility issues because there's no lift. We need to be prepared for people before they come, right before they enter into the building. If a family shows up, again, just to bring it back to that analogy, right? If a family shows up and there's no children programming, what is the likelihood that that family is going to come back? Probably not very high. I mean, and maybe even zero. And so we create, this is again, just an example, we create children's and family programming today to guarantee that we are ready for tomorrow. Prioritizing who we want to see means designing what we do around who we want to see, not only who we have. Last week when we talked about vision, I admit this part, right? It could have been very easy to come away from that message thinking, great, not much has changed, right? We just tweaked the vision a little bit. Previous vision was to be a community fully alive in Jesus, right? To be a community fully alive. And as we talked about this at session with the elders and myself, as we wrestled some of these things through, one of the things that we pointed out was that as soon as we say we exist to be a community, what happens is the vision tips in on itself because it becomes about the community, which isn't bad, it just is. It's something that we need to acknowledge. Not opposed, but in addition to, when we say to see people become, what we hope is happening, what I hope is happening in you is saying, hey, this pushes our vision outside beyond ourselves. And for sure, the community needs to be a part of it and needs to be a very important part of it. All my favorite theologians talk about community. One of them actually ditched the entire word church in favor of community. But we need to not limit it here. We need to push our vision out beyond ourselves. To see people is meant to push our vision beyond ourselves and to say from the very beginning we are going to prioritize the other. There's a story about Jesus healing a man who had been paralyzed. He himself has mobility issues for 38 years, more or less. This is how the story goes. But Jesus is back in Jerusalem, and I'm going to read a section in a minute. But Jesus is back in Jerusalem, and he's back for some festivals that were happening. He goes into through one of the gates. It's the sheep gate, which you don't need to remember. But at that particular gate around Jerusalem, into Jerusalem, there was a pool. And it was like a natural spring. It's called Bethesda. And what would happen is that people would gather there, people with various illnesses and sicknesses, mobility issues, paralyzed. Like these are people who would gather. As the spring bubbled up, the common sort of mythology, legend, narrative around this spring was that the first person to get in would be healed. And so it was like a race. As soon as the pool would bubble, people would try to be the first to get into the spring because they believed that if they were, then they would be healed. Jesus shows up and he meets this man paralyzed for 38 years, and this is the interaction between them. It says, when Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in this condition for a long time, he asked him, I love this question, do you want to get well? Sir, the invalid, the man replied, I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. While I'm trying to get in, he continues, someone else goes down ahead of me. Then Jesus said to him, this is Jesus' immediate response, get up, pick up your mat, and walk. And if you grew up in the Presbyterian church, you probably know the song that goes along with this that I am not going to sing because nobody wants to hear that. But the dude he goes walking and leaping and praising God, right? Like this is how it goes. And I learned that song as a child in Sunday school. This is Jesus meeting the man in the midst of his illness, in the midst of his condition, in the midst of his need, and saying, be healed. And it's first and foremost a story of healing, and we need to remember that and keep that ahead of us. And I think it has something very specific to say to you and to me and to us as a church today about where it is we're going. I love this question. Just back up for a second. I love this question. Do you want to get well? And there's a part of me that wants to say, hey, this is a question that Jesus continues to ask each of you, each of us. Do you want to get well? I picture this guy, 38 years, going, yes. Yeah, I do. Like, why do you think I've been lying beside the pool for as long as I have? Every time it stirs up, I try to get in. Like, I'm trying. Can't you see I'm trying to be made well? Can't you see I'm trying to get, like, what kind of question is this? Like, I picture all of these responses. Why do you think I wait here? Don't you think I'm trying? Like, over and over, 38 years, right? Year after year. I wonder how many times this man has tried the same exact thing, hoping that there might be a different result, holding on to a little bit of hope that things this time might be different, and year after year getting the same exact thing, not being healed. And here's Jesus, and I love this response. He says, get up, pick up your mat, and walk. Jesus doesn't show up and say, hey, good job, you're trying hard. You're working hard. I can see every year you've been doing this and you're doing the right thing. You're not successful at it. Let me sit with you, and when the pool stirs, we'll go down together. I'll pick you up and I'll plunk you in. I can even toss you from here if you want. Like, I'll make sure you're the first person in. Like, Jesus doesn't show up and say, okay, let's continue doing the same thing. Jesus shows up and completely shatters the man's expectations of how he was going to get well. And so he'd been on this particular path, and it wasn't working, and Jesus shows up and he says, hey, there's actually a new way. There is a better way for you to be made well. He simply says, go. He said, get up, be healed, pick up your mat and walk. The thing that has crippled you, quite literally, has held you to the ground is gone, because I can, in the name of Jesus, right, I can heal you. Just get up, pick up your mat and walk. And at once the man, it says, was cured. I wish life was that easy. I do. I do think that Jesus is asking this question of each of us. Like I said, there are these things maybe that you've tried to heal or fix, and you're just like, maybe you're sitting there, you're standing there, you're just like banging your head against the wall over and over again, trying to do something, and nothing's happening. And here's Jesus who wants to come alongside you and say, hey, there is a better way, there is a new way toward life. Here's Jesus who challenges us and says, are you willing to change? Are you willing to have your expectations changed if it means life? And if it means a way forward? There's a sentiment, and here's a sentiment that I hear a lot in the church. We want to grow, but we don't want to change. Right? As if to say, hey, we want to grow. We want all of the things that we can picture of as growth. We want to see people. We want to see kids. We want to see families. We want to see increased givings. We want to see all these things, but don't you dare ask us to change. We want things to stay exactly the same because we like them. And here's Jesus who shows up and says, hey, Einstein was probably right, though it's probably not Einstein who actually said, right? Insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again and anticipating, expecting a different result. It's true, probably wasn't Einstein, but that's okay. If we are going to reach people that we are not currently reaching, we need to do the things that we're not currently doing. I love this line. It's Craig Groeschel. It's not my line. He says, if you want to reach people that nobody is reaching, that no church is successful currently in reaching, you'll have to do things no one else is doing. And like I said, for us, for our purposes, if we want to reach people that we are not currently reaching, it's going to require we do some things that we're not currently doing. And so if I could, as we wrap up today, which is always a dangerous line to include in a sermon, because you now have no idea how long this thing's going to be. I want to highlight 3 priorities for us. And 3 things that I think are probably the most important for us in a strategic way to pay attention to in this next season of our life together. And they're 3. They're not going to sound, in any way, shape, or form new. But it's families, worship, and groups. And that session met, and as we prayed, and as we kind of worked through this document, and what are all the things that we have done, and what are all the things that we could do, and what's the vision, and who are we going to reach, and landed on the top 2 priorities for us, family and worship, and a very, very quick, I think, third is groups. But they're all related, and they all play off each other. And so first, families. If we want to reach our community, and one of the things you remember that I pointed out last week is that 50% of households in Waterdown have kids, then our number 1 priority, I think, for us needs to be families. And families are going to look different. And families are going to be, not in our mind how we expect them, and it includes a whole lot of different shapes and sizes and generations, and I don't want you to hear for a second that this excludes you, because you, each one of us, right, part of a family. How are we going to become a church, though, that prioritizes families? I think at the end of the day, what's very clear is that families matter to God. And again, we can go down a whole lot of different rabbit trails about what families look like or ought to look like or could look like or do look like, and we're not going to do that. What we are going to say is, your family matters to God. Jesus uses the image, right, of a child to describe the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And so at the end of the day, we want to be a church. We're called to be a church where kids experience the love of God in different ways, shapes, through different programmings, on Sundays, throughout the week. Those things can be figured out. The culture behind it is, are we going to be a church that prioritizes family? Are we going to be a church that prioritizes kids? Are we going to be a church that says, hey, we thought about you before you got here? All right, vibrant, fun, life-giving ministry for kids that introduces them to the love of Jesus so they can walk away going, like, at the end of the day, hey, there's a God who loves me. And it's not just me who's telling them, but us together in the life that we live. So we move on, worship. Number 2, we can talk about worship as being an important part in the life of the family of God, right? In the life of the church. We exist to be a worshiping community. We exist to be a community where we gather together and worship. And for a long time, it's looked like this. We call this worship, and it is part of it. But how are we going to continue to be a church that prioritizes, that draws people into relationship with Jesus, right? That turns hearts and minds toward God? In worship, we believe, like, there are some of these statements. The church is gathered together. We talked about, I mentioned this a little bit in the prayer, but the Holy Spirit actually gathers us to worship. And worship has a purpose. It's to build up. It's to encourage. It's to challenge. It's to convict. It's to change. And then it's to send out. Because I don't know about you, but like Monday morning, like your feet hit the floor, my feet hit the floor. And what I'm hoping, what I'm praying is that as I worship as a part of this community, is that what I'm doing today changes the way I'm going to live tomorrow. That how I worship on Sunday, as we sing, as scripture's read, as people are praying for our community and beyond, and as we open up scripture together, and sometimes I get to do that, and sometimes other people do as well, but like all of it, I hope and pray changes my life for tomorrow. And I pray that it changes your life for tomorrow as well. Worship, though, at the end of the day, right, is not about us. Worship is about God. Worship is about bringing what we have before God. And worship, like, God is the one, the only one, I got to tell you, who's worth worshiping. And if worship is all about God, then we need to care for those who God cares for. And we need to be practical and active in pursuing those whose hearts God is pursuing. We need to make worship accessible for those who are far from Him. Invitational, right, so that it's easy for somebody to come in and become a part of this community long before they believe, but because, hey, at the end of it, like, there's something here that they want to hold on to. We need to be able to speak to our cultural moment, right, in a way that engages people who want no business to do with church. And we need to worship and engage ourselves and each other in a way that encourages and challenges us to reach people, right, we want to see. So if I could just paint a goal for you, families and worship for a second. What would it look like for us to have 200 people here on a Sunday? It's just a number. But what would that look like? And what would it look like for us to have 100 kids involved in weekly, regular kids programming? What would it mean to help shape the lives of kids and of families, of people together in the way we worship and in the way we lead and in the way we embrace families? And what would you be willing to give up in order to reach that mark? Finally, groups, because I think that this is an important part just to mention today and to work toward. It's important for us to realize that we live our lives in a series of small groups. So like small groups has become this like churchy term, and that's okay. Small groups, life groups, home church, house church. Like there's a whole lot of different churchy terms for it. But at the end of the day, when you think about the way you interact with people, it's probably, with your family. It's with friends. It's with colleagues at work. Each one of those, this small group of people that you are investing in, you're investing time in and energy with, and they're hopefully investing in you. And sometimes it's like, it's net positive, and like other times you're at work and you're just like, it's net negative all the time. And you're just like, I don't know what to do. You're banging your head against the wall again. But we live our lives investing in this group, these small groups. And this is, I think, at the end of the day, because it was the way life was intended to be lived. I can't live my life fully invested in the lives of 100 people, 150 people, 75 people, probably 50 people. Like, I don't know where the cutoff is, but we know that you live your best life and your best relationships are with, about 12 people. And so what would it look like for every single one of us who calls Knox Church home to be involved in a small group of friends, of families, of people who can challenge you, of people who can come alongside you? Like at the end of the day, home church, house church, small groups can become the foundation of discipleship, how you learn and grow in your faith, the things that are challenging you most about God and about the life that you're living, how you bring those two things together. Those are the groups that can bring you accountability, who can say, hey, you've committed to this. You talk a lot about this. You talk a lot about prioritizing these things, and maybe here are some ways that we're seeing you go sideways in your life. Like discipleship and accountability can happen in big groups, but they happen best in small groups when you learn to trust and know one another, and when they get to know and learn and trust you as well. So again, just a goal for us, a goal for you to think about and dream about. Every single person connected to Knox, also connected to a small group outside of the building, right outside of Sunday mornings where you're here, we're all here together for life, for growth, for discipleship, for accountability, for spiritual health, for emotional health, all of these things that we believe Jesus is leading you toward. Those are the three: families, worship, and groups. When I think about it, and again, this is one thing that I can say now. I don't know how it'll play out. There's nothing that I wouldn't do if it meant that my kids knew Jesus when I die. Because one day I will. And then all of my wants and all of my preferences and all of my wishes and all of the things that I carry with me, all of my biases, like everything will also just be dead and gone. But the things of faith, the things that I communicate to them, that I teach them, God willing, about Jesus, that will live on. And those are the things that I want to pass down. And those are the things that I think we together are called to pass down to the next generation and beyond. Everything that I will be able to teach my girls along the way about the God who loved them, who created them, about Jesus who died for them. My prayer is that they live on, that those things live on in their lives. I've got no illusions. Change, whenever we talk about change always demands more from those who are here. So for me to get up here and talk about change is for me to get up here and ask more of you who are here, both online and in person. And I got to be honest, change always demands the most from those who have reached a higher level in the video game that we're all playing called life, right? The older you are, the more it's asking of you. But as I read Scripture, I'm convinced of a few things. Jesus didn't say, follow me, and all of your wants and your wishes are going to be met. But he did say, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, herself. Let them take up their cross and let them follow me.